Tender as the Night begins with the introduction of a new and rising young actress named Rosemary Hoyt, who is on vacation at the French Riviera with her mother. While on the beach, the tension during this time between Americans and Europeans is extremely obvious due to the commentary that Rosemary and several minor characters make while studying the types of people on the beach and their skin color. Skin color is discussed a lot during this part of the book, showing the time period's blatant racism. While on the beach, Rosemary is introduced to Dick Diver, a charming, handsome, and successful psychologist with whom she immediately falls in love with. However, Dick is married and is oftentimes disgusted with Rosemary's childish tendencies and her intense reliance on her mother's opinions and approval of every decision she makes in her life. Dick attempts to desperately detach her from her mother's control and take away her innocence and purity. As for Dick's wife, Nicole, she is described as intimidating, young, and very beautiful. Rosemary envies Nicole, but can't help admiring her for how calm and collected she seems. The divers as a whole are portrayed as sophisticated, graceful people who are loved and respected by everyone. As Rosemary becomes close with the couple and is introduced to their extravagant way of living, Dick begins to develop reciprocated feelings for Rosemary as she starts to detach from her mother's grasp and begins making her own decisions for the first time in her life. A shallow and short-lived affair begins to bloom. Suddenly, one of Dick's friends, who was an alcoholic, kills a black man by accident, and Rosemary sees the dead body in the neighboring hotel room. She is traumatized, and the hotel staff, as well as Rosemary's friends and family, are far more concerned with Rosemary's well-being than of the black man that was innocently murdered. The case is never fully investigated, and the man who murdered him fled town and was never seen or discussed throughout the novel again. After this horrific and traumatic event, Rosemary discovers Dick consoling Nicole during a mental breakdown she is having in the hotel bathroom, and the reader, as well as the majority of the characters in the novel, are now aware of her mental illness and the fact that the diver name has now become somewhat tarnished. This concludes the first out of 3 parts that make up the novel and is written in present time. The novel suddenly switches to the past in Part 2, where the reader is introduced to a young, ambitious Dick Diver, fresh out of school at Yale and ready to study clinical psychology in Vienna. As Dick was getting ready to leave a psychiatric clinic in Zurich, he is introduced and asked to work with Nicole Warren, a young, damaged girl who is checking into the institution. We learn about Nicole's past and the sexual abuse she received from her father as a child. He convinced the entire Warren family that she was mentally ill because of a past boyfriend and something he must have done to her that they were unaware of. Because of this, Nicole develops an overall distrust of men and usually avoids them in general. However, as soon as she is introduced to Dick, she falls deeply in love with him, and after some time apart and many unreciprocated letters, he begins to fall for her as well. The two marry, and Dick becomes both her husband and doctor, a clearly dangerous situation. Everything was at first ideal when they began their marriage, had 2 children, and spent their time traveling the world with open hearts and minds. Part 2 ends on a promising note, which is the antithesis to the beginning of the 3rd and final part of the novel, which flashes back to present time after Nicole's relapse. We are reminded of this incident in the beginning of Part 3 when Dick decides to invest in a clinic in Switzerland, partially for money and new experiences, and partially for Nicole's mental health. Shortly after the move, as Dick begins to settle in and adjust to his new job and environment, a previous client of his accuses him of infidelity through a letter that Nicole finds and confronts Dick about. He denies that anything happened and claims that the information is false because it is coming from a mental patient, and this angers and offends Nicole because she herself is a mental patient and has been for the majority of her life. Dick decides they need to go for a drive to cool off, so they take the kids, and Nicole insists on driving so she can calm down. This, however, does not work at all, and she becomes so distressed and angry that she drives the car off the road and into a tree. Physically, everyone is okay, but mentally and emotionally, the family is distraught. Shortly after the accident, Dick receives a phone call from a friend back home, informing him that his father has passed away. Dick goes to America so he can attend the funeral, as well as gain some space from Nicole and their broken relationship. When Dick returns, instead of seeing Nicole, he decides to attempt at rekindling his affair with Rosemary, but is shocked to find that she has developed into a confident, independent woman who no longer relies on him for anything. Dick becomes terrified when he realizes that neither of the women in his life need him, causing him to spiral out of control and transform into a completely different person. Dick begins to drink excessively and constantly, and often elicits drunk fights at bars and on the streets. Despite his close friend's effort to save his job at the clinic, Dick is fired, increasing the violence and drinking drastically. Suddenly, he becomes involved in an intense street fight, resulting in his imprisonment at a local county jail. Nicole's sister, Baby, is forced to beg the guards to release him, showing another dominant, independent female character in the novel. The novel concludes with Nicole asking Dick for a divorce in order to marry a much kinder and respectful man named Tommy, showing that her mental health has increased tremendously. As for Dick, he disappears and finds refuge back in America by himself, engulfed in his alcoholic and selfish tendencies that caused his demise.